We've finally reached the last question in the consultation. There are just two things to cover before we can form an answer: a glaring issue with funding and timescales and the ongoing judicial review. Funding timescales is one of my biggest concerns, but I haven't really seen it discussed. Most of the major investment plans announced in this consultation have confirmed funding for around 3 years. But the new system would take over just as many of those funding commitments end, and we may also get a new government around the same time, which could be disastrous. What happens if this funding is reduced or stopped altogether? Once legal protections are removed, our children and schools are just stuck with what they're given, whether it's enough or not. So these investments feel a bit like a Trojan horse. They're asking us to accept reduced legal rights in exchange for promises of funding and services that could disappear just as they're needed most. If a child is moved from an EHCP to an ISP and then funding for experts at hand goes away or isn't enough, what will happen to our children then? When I started looking at these questions, my immediate thought was, why aren't these questions about the actual plans? It seems that wasn't an oversight. So back in March, the government seemed to admit that where there is no question, decisions had already been made. There was a letter before action about this consultation issued by law firm Rook Owen Sweeney on behalf of a disabled child, in part because there are no questions about some of the most significant changes. When challenged on why they weren't asking for views on reducing tribunal powers or shifting legal duties onto schools for EHCP delivery, the government responded, "The Secretary of State has made decisions about these issues and thus has chosen not to consult on them, hence there are no specific questions about them, and also why at page 21 it states each section contains relevant underlined consultation questions." To translate, this suggests that where there are no direct questions about any part of the plans, they've already decided they are going to do it. Do you remember me saying so many times in these videos they're asking the wrong question? That wasn't accidental. You're probably wondering why you should even bother responding at this point, but after significant backlash to their reply, the consultation wording was updated to add, "We welcome and will carefully consider comments and representation on all aspects of the consultation paper and subjects related to the proposed reforms, and that further comments can be made here at question 39. That update is why I started making this series. If they are going to respond to a letter before action saying they will carefully consider our views, then we need to give our views and then publicly hold them to this. I was asked to provide a witness statement for this judicial review, which was informed by your comments, so I just want you to know that your experiences have fed into that case. I will keep you updated as it goes on. There is a problem with the government's claim though. Question 39 only has a 1500 character limit, so do not waste your characters repeating yourself. If you run out of space, go back to the closest relevant question and add your point there. I suggest you focus on the big picture and the issues that are concerning you most. I'm guessing for many of you that's the loss of legal rights, so do explain how that would affect your family or school as clearly as you can. For example, they fail to explain what would happen to children receiving education other than in school or college. When you combine that with the other proposed changes, like fewer children receiving EHCPs, individual provision replaced with standardised packages, alternative provision being framed as mostly short-term, tribunals losing powers over ordering placements, parents only being offered a list of school, and the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill making it harder for parents to remove a child with SEND from a school even if it's not working, the consequences for some children and families could be catastrophic and could cause a crisis within the system, and they need to know that. For me, I think almost everything related to specialist provision and placement needs to go back to the drawing board. And I also do not think there are enough safeguards to ensure genuine inclusion in mainstream settings will be achieved. There are almost no meaningful consequences when children are failed, despite accountability being one of the biggest concerns that's been raised. And of course, the reduction in legal rights will be front and centre in my response. A huge amount of this consultation relies on idealistic assumptions about every part of the system functioning perfectly through enormous change. But real systems do not work perfectly at the best of times. And if one part of this plan fails, the whole thing risks collapsing like a house of cards. There is no right answer to this question, but there is value in making sure that your concerns and experiences are clearly on the record. We do not want them to be able to say that we were given the opportunity to respond and we just didn't use it. Your response could matter enormously in whatever comes next, because this is not the end of it. The consultation closes on Monday the 18th of May, so please share this series before the deadline. Well done to everyone who's submitted a response already, even if you've only answered 1 or 2 questions. And thank you to everyone who has spread the word. Families should not have to rely on videos made by struggling parent carers to understand changes this significant, and we shouldn't feel that we have to make them to make it clear. It should never have been on us to make this process accessible, but here we are. I've had lots of messages and comments from people asking how they can support my work, so I will put a link in the comments, but honestly the most important thing to me right now is getting the word out, so you are helping by interacting with these posts. I'm really hoping that you feel more able to respond at this point, but do let me know in the comments if you still have any questions that you need help with, and do follow. There may be updates or final thoughts this week before the deadline.